we are hoping, as I said, to kind of go back over this, use it for analysis, and help your local representative understand the concerns of the community, the unique needs of the community, etc. So let me, in my remaining minutes, just quickly go over the climate planning connection. And let me preface this a little bit by saying, we know that the city wants to move in the direction of intensification, right? No surprise. We also know that the transect issue is particularly of concern in Alta Vista, and we've heard from that. We've heard about that. We've heard that there was a Zoom call that was much more popular than this, with 500 people on it. So we know that something's happening in Alta Vista, and so all of that is as a preface to the remarks. I'm making the climate argument. The climate argument is in favor of density, right? And I think it's a slam dunk, easy argument if you're just looking at the climate lens. But we know that the climate lens is not the only lens. So let me just kind of contextualize that a bit and say that there are obviously other considerations. There's beauty, there's vibrancy, there's walkability, there's dynamism, there's the strength of local business, there is the integrity and character of a neighborhood. There's all sorts of things that play a role in how we shape our communities. But the climate piece is obviously where we're coming from as Ecology Ottawa. So let me just very quickly share my screen, and I promise I won't take too long with this. This is a presentation I gave to the Manor Park Community Association a while back. So this is it's not a typo. It's not accidentally, I didn't give you the wrong slides. But I'll just really quickly go through the rationale that we're looking at. Why cities? Why do cities matter? It's where 80% of Canadians live. It's where the world is moving. We know that increasingly cities are under pressure to accommodate all sorts of basically large levels of influx, right? And so that's the kind of like the background behind the city's intensification targets. And my slides have stopped working. Here, let me just. It looks like it's frozen. Can you see the slides this way? Okay, I'm seeing nodding. So really quickly, Ecology Ottawa as an environmental organization is concerned about climate emissions. And this is the pie chart that the city has that they're working with, where you can see that roughly there's a half and half split almost between transportation and buildings, and how we design our communities, the floor space, the requirement to drive. Those two things really take up a ton of our emissions. So changing our built form will address those two areas. Might have some incidental, effects on waste as well, but not too much. And then let's look at the climate action checklist. This is from Dr. Diane Sachs, the former Environmental Commissioner of Ontario. She's looking at it from an Ontario perspective, but she's saying, what are the best ways to take action on climate change for the province? Number one is pricing carbon pollution. Number two is this kind of sprawl density connection. And number three is protecting nature. And Dr. Sachs, of course, speaking to the province, knows that provincially you can price carbon. The city does not have the potential to price carbon. So the two tools in the city's toolkit are circled here, number two and number three. And then just quickly, two more slides. When we talk about the interaction of built form and emissions, oh, this one's not showing either. So technical glitches on a Saturday morning. So what I'll do is I'll send these slides after for everyone's consideration because they're just not showing up on my screen for whatever reason. But one basically is it shows the inverse correlation worldwide between essentially urban density and transportation related emissions. And you can actually see, interestingly, little clusters of cities that are within a given area. The European cities tend to travel together. The North American cities tend to travel together. East Asian cities tend to travel together. And so they all have different kind of points on that inverse correlation, but it's a very, very nicely drawn line. For those of us who look at correlation lines all day, it's a really nice one. So happy to share that with you after the call. And then finally, there's another one that shows the GTA carbon footprint. This is again from the analysis of Dr. Sachs. Unfortunately, because of her provincial position. She focused on the GTA, surprise, surprise. So there's no Ottawa-specific map. Ecology Ottawa is actually working on that right now. Cheryl's working hard with some great groups, including the Ottawa Eco Talent Network, to bring a map forward that will show our emissions in different areas of the city. And I think what we're going to see is, depending on how far a person has to drive, the emissions will go up. Surprise, surprise, right? So that's why we're talking about walkability, 15-minute neighborhoods, etc. So without any further ado, I'll stop there and hand it over to Marty Carr.
Perfect, thanks Rob, and good morning to everyone. I'm just going to talk just for a few minutes just about the official plan in 15-minute neighborhoods in Alta Vista. As the president of the Alta Vista Community Association, I received a lot of feedback that I was cross-copied on from residents of Alta Vista. Just for those of you that don't know, the city has confirmed that Alta Vista was by far the biggest responder to the official plan. Second only, Old Ottawa South was second. I believe that Alta Vista was actually about 70% of the feedback to the city of Ottawa. So they're definitely listening to us. Just before I start, Rob, I'm just going to mention that last night I found out that the city of Ottawa is adding a session on the 15-minute neighborhood on March 30th. It's not up for registration yet, but you will be able to register for that as well. A lot of the feedback that we received, that I'm not going to talk about the feedback we received about quadrupling the density. Obviously, that was a huge amount of the feedback. But we received a lot in terms of active transportation and walkability within Alta Vista. And we received a lot of feedback on why maybe the 15-minute neighborhood may not work, or what some of the concerns were. And things that were brought to our attention are that, you know, even though there's a big portion of Alta Vista which was deemed to be inner urban, we didn't actually really meet that definition, in the fact that we don't really have local bus service. We're looking at Pleasant Park Station today. The local bus currently only travels down that road once an hour, and local bus service is really 15 minutes according to the definition that is in the official plan. There's also a lot of challenges with walkability in our neighborhood. We heard a lot about the lack of sidewalk maintenance, the lack of sidewalks. I actually haven't walked the full length of Pleasant Park myself. I'm closer to the Kilbourne area, but I heard that there wasn't even sidewalks on both sides all the way down. There were stops, there were starts, and it was inconsistent. Heard concerns about the sidewalk maintenance when we're on a big slope on those streets. We also heard about the lack of cycling infrastructure. We've been waiting for years for the bike lanes to come onto Alta Vista. They're being held up by the sewer infrastructure project. And that's how the phasing of that will take a number of years. We also heard about the street grid in Alta Vista, and that it's not really conducive to easily walking somewhere in 15 minutes. And the Pleasant Park bus station is a great example. When you look at the folks who live on Mountbatten and Rachel, it should be really easy to get there. You could, but it's not. You have to walk completely outside of the neighborhood and around. So there's a lot of issues with making Alta Vista, there's a lot of concerns with, why are we intensifying to the degree that was suggested when we don't have the infrastructure to encourage people to get out there and use active transportation? And so if we add more people, you're going to add more cars, because it's just not that as easy to get around. I think I've covered most of the key points that we heard about. Really looking forward to this workshop, and thanks Rob and Cheryl and Rosalind from Walkable Ottawa. But just to add, if anybody has any follow-ups ever on 15-minute neighborhood, anything about the official plan, the email is contact@abca.ca. I can always, it takes me a few days to respond these days, but happy to hear from all the residents. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Marty. Now we can hand it over to the good folks from Walkable Ottawa.
Great. Thanks very much, Rob, and good morning, everybody. My name is Carolyn McKenzie. I'm with Walkable Ottawa. I'm like you are this morning as well. I'm a volunteer. I live in the Glebe, and I happen to chair the planning committee for the Glebe Community Association. But I've been interested in this idea, this notion of walkable neighborhoods, and how we can try and advance all of our neighborhoods across the city. recognizing the challenges that a number of neighborhoods have, but basically to try and enhance and promote walkability within neighborhoods across the city. The Glebe is a fairly walkable neighborhood, so we're very fortunate in many respects. But I think it's important that we try and get as many of us living in walkable neighborhoods. So for the reasons that Rob described, we can not be so reliant on our cars. We can get out of our cars. We can be healthier with the option to walk or bike or active transportation in general. Many different reasons, as Rob said. It's certainly the environmental lens that we look at it, but also just adding to the dynamism and the livability of our neighborhoods through many of the components that come together under a walkable neighborhood. So we get asked of who is Walkable Ottawa. As I said, we're all volunteers contributing our time because we're very interested and passionate about the subject. I guess I would describe us as basically a collective of residents and interested stakeholders who are interested in developing more practical solutions. We believe the devil's in the details, and I think what we've seen in the official plan, and I'm very aware of how engaged and active your neighborhood has been in responding, obviously, to the official plan. But I think some of the challenges of the official plan is some people describe it sometimes as planning from 30,000 feet in the air, as opposed to really getting into the details of how neighborhoods work. And you understand that. People who live in neighborhoods understand that best. We are a collective of individuals. We also very intentionally have tried to include stakeholders, I'll say sort of from across the spectrum. I refer to as sort of reaching across the aisle. And so we're working in partnership here with Ecology Ottawa. We're also working with the FCA, with the Umbrella Group for Community Associations, other sort of sector-specific stakeholder groups, and as well as the Greater Ottawa Home Builders Association, because we think that really to get at solutions, we felt that it was a rolling up the sleeves process of really understanding the ideas from all different viewpoints and just trying to have a better conversation with people who come at it from different angles and really understanding, again, in the interest of trying to get at practical solutions. So we have a fairly flexible organizational structure. I would say that Rosalind Hill had reached out to me last June. I think Rosalind, you were looking to sort of bring in someone with a so-called community lens to add to the conversation. And I said yes almost before she finished the question of was I interested, because I was interested in trying to have better conversations about this. As I said, I'm from the Glebe, and I chair the planning committee there. As Rob alluded to, why are we focused on these workshops? Again, because we really think that it's important to get into the details of how a neighborhood works, the patterns of development, the behaviors, the demographics, the needs, certainly the opportunities for how to advance walkability within neighborhoods. So we think it's important, and we think that's one thing, and we've pointed it out, that's really been lacking. The city has, in the official plan draft, the city has talked for the last few years at least about how neighborhoods matter, but when it came down to receiving the draft, apparently neighborhoods didn't matter enough to really get into the details of how we're going to take those 5 big moves, all the aspirational sort of high level language, and implement that. We saw that as lacking, and so what we're trying to do here in a sense is to pilot a process through these and to refine and learn from this process, trying to get a better way to plan at a neighborhood level that will be successful and help achieve the objectives, but also won't break the bank. So by relying on input and contributions from residents in neighborhoods, and by trying to put together a tool in a sense that is sort of fit for purpose, and we spend the right amount of effort and direct it at the right objectives, so that, because we think it's important to do this sort of exercise really across the city. It shouldn't just be for the privileged few neighborhoods where the city decides, well, this year we're going to focus on 4 neighborhoods across the city, when in reality is that really every neighborhood has their different issues, but could benefit from this sort of exercise. So we're trying to develop a tool for the city that we can all use. So we look forward to your constructive feedback just on process once we work through this workshop, as well as the actual results. So moving into to the concept of maybe just briefly touching on the concept of regeneration that you've seen in the official plan. I think the official plan confused things. They started out by talking about regeneration and in the sort of way that we think about it, about guiding neighborhoods towards being more complete, 15-minute neighborhoods that meet the daily needs of residents and in a walkable sense, but and it also means obviously that services, parks, public spaces, et cetera, are in balance with population as population increases. Then there was some confusion because the draft official plan seemed to relapse into, in most cases, in talking purely about intensification. So we just want to make it clear that when we talk about the elements of a complete neighborhood, we are very supportive, obviously, of the broader sort of, and I'll call it sort of an ecosystem approach to regeneration. And I think someone had pointed out, I can't remember who, someone whose comments that I saw for the official plan pointed out that perhaps regeneration is not a great word because it sort of implies that there's something wrong, something to be fixed. And in some cases that is true, but I wouldn't say that every neighborhood needs to be regenerated as if something has disintegrated and needs to be brought back. But it is a matter of, I think, adding dynamism, adding sufficient population to support the services and that we need and want, whether it's be sidewalks or very localized, small scale, fine grained commercial or what have you. Okay, so just a few comments about the study area itself. So just so that people are aware, I think you've got the workbook. It has the map that shows the study area itself. So it's basically Riverside Parkway to the west. It doesn't include Smythe Road, but Smythe Road is sort of the border to the north, Fairbanks Avenue, and then Crocus, I believe it is, to the south. A little bit of it's not a perfect square. It is intended to be within 1.5 kilometers of the Pleasant Park transit station. That being said, that we understand the limitations of that. Marty spoke to some of the challenges of that accessing that transit station. So, and just a couple of quick stats I think it's important to understand are just the basics of the area itself. Let me just go up to that and the workshop. Yeah, so it's about 150 hectares in area, but at 1.5 square kilometers, if you prefer to think of it that way. Just over 1,000 houses roughly on about 38 city blocks. Obviously it's a very residential and very strong community with most residents living in single family homes. I'll just give the quick comparison to my own neighborhood, that being the Glebe. We're about 170 hectares. We have about 12,000, although we'll need to get an update based on the latest census, but we're about 12,000 people. And so on a dwelling units per net hectare basis, which is a measure that the city uses, we're roughly 45 to 50 dwelling units per net hectare. And this would compare to the study area, which is about 2,500 people and roughly 15 dwelling units per net hectare. So just to give you, that's just a quick comparison with my own neighborhood. Just to give you a sense of those things. And I think I know there are lots of questions. There are always lots of questions about this measure, and it's used in the official plan for their minimum density targets of dwelling units, which is just another word for homes, and those homes can be of different descriptions. But on average, the city estimates we are about 2.5 people per dwelling unit. Or per home. And then net hectare is just indicative, rather than taking the full land area, it's basically taking the land area and removing or taking out all of the public right-of-way, sidewalks, roadways, and institutional land, roughly. So it's really just focusing on the land where homes occupy and the surrounding, the property, the specific property around that. So that's where the net comes in as well. So that's just a bit of a definition to add to that as well. I think that's it for now. Rosalind, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that sort of opening?
No, that sounds good. I think I was going to chat a little with Xavier's help. We were just going to talk a little bit more about the neighborhood and how it's characterized by its residents. So Xavier, where do you live?
I live on Mountbatten Avenue.
Okay. And
right within the study area too, just at the edge.
Okay. All right. And can you, we'll open this question up to everybody to answer just in the chat box. But while people are answering in the chat box, Xavier, maybe you can answer speaking. What keywords would you use to describe your neighborhood?
One I've heard often is tranquil.
Okay.
Leafy. Shaded, because we have an abundance of mature trees. And I guess the rest is up to the chat.
Anybody want to add anything? And the reason that we're asking is because, oh, sleepy, welcoming. Somewhat hilly. That's actually a good point. It is quite hilly. When it comes to walkability, that can be a big thing, right?
Yeah, especially along Pleasant Park, actually. And parallel streets.
Not dynamic, someone has put. Xavier, what do you think of that comment?
It's quiet. Like I said, it's tranquil. It isn't filled with community amenities. So we other than parks, we do have an abundance of parks. But built amenities, we don't have that many of, except near the study area or within it is a church, and we actually use that for a lot of other activities other than worship, such as scouting, the community association meetings pre-COVID, and various clubs, I think, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, it's there. We could definitely work on that, if I may say so myself.
All right, we've got tons of great words here. Magical, speeding cars, very kind, friendly, safe to walk and bike, difficult to navigate when safely using active transit. Yeah, no, okay, and kind, friendly, quiet. Thank you, these are fantastic. All right, now, Xavier, describe your experience if you go for a walk. Step out your door and
yeah. Well,
and other people, feel free to add in the chat the same answer or their answer to the same question.
Yeah, this is just my personal experience, guys.
That's right, and everybody else's personal experience in the chat.
Exactly, we invite you to contribute to the discussion. So usually it's more interesting when I put music on, but I could wander around in my neighborhood and not get lost because I know my way around, but I could just walk in the same direction for several minutes, and while I still see where I'm going, I sort of lose myself in the tranquil greenery, I guess. It's really a place where I guess there aren't that many things to look at unless I'm interested in the particular design of certain houses, but it's a good place to wander, and I agree that it's scenic in its own way. But so it's great actually for a recreational walk, one that I'm taking for my health, one that I'm taking just because I want to breathe in the fresh air and take in the sunshine. But when I do notice that when it's a walk that I have to take just to the bus station, to well, that's it, the bus station. It feels like I just want it to end. when it's a walk that I have to take quickly, the perceived length in my head seems to be longer than when I'm taking a recreational walk. When it's a walk where I have a clear destination, but one where I just need to commute to go to school or to work. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, thank you. And everybody's perception of walking is a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
But research about people's walk and people's perception of walking has certainly provided evidence that when you walk past things that are very much the same, and when you're not seeing a lot of people or people spaces, walks tend to seem longer. So research has demonstrated that if you're walking past porches or shop windows, a walk will feel shorter, even though it might be the same length as a comparable walk that's just past lots that are repetitive, or lots that have less of those things that particularly grab our interest or imagination. Okay, so I just want to add, I'm Rosalind. I'm an infill architect and development consultant, and I live in Britannia, and I have projects throughout the city, not particularly in Alta Vista. And so I wanted to share with you some perspectives that I have of your neighborhood from the perspective of my work, or my kind of analytical mind that I bring to looking at a neighborhood. I'll just pop your map up on the screen. Are you looking at the map? Yes, okay. I'm not sure why it's showing up black and white here, because I thought it would be colored, but that's okay. So we've got Pleasant Park Station here. This is Pleasant Park Road, Riverside Drive, and the river up here. And one of the things that I see that's unique about this little piece of neighborhood is some very deep lots on either side of Pleasant Park Drive. And when I look back in the historical photos, I saw that it's because this street used to be an old farm road, or it's one of the older roads in the neighborhood, and the lots seem to have been established along it differently at an earlier point in history. And so to me, it's interesting to see that piece of history in a neighborhood that otherwise kind of looks all the same, as everything looks the same. Also very uniquely running through is Alta Vista, which we all experience differently than other streets in your neighborhood, because we've probably all commuted along it in a car. Riverside Drive also, we experience very, very, very differently than other streets in your neighborhood. So those are just some of the things that I picked out as being different and unique here. So I am, Carolyn, over to you now to talk about the official plan and density.
Okay, thanks, Rosalind. Let me just get down to my notes. Okay. Thanks. So I just wanted to spend just a couple of minutes, I guess, talking a little bit more about the draft official plan and what it means, a little bit about what it means for Alta Vista, but neighborhoods in the city of Ottawa more generally. I sort of, again, I wasn't involved in, I wasn't one of the 500 people that showed up to your community meeting to discuss comments. So I'm leery of telling this group what you already know about the official plan, but so maybe I'll just, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but just sort of hit some of the highlights, I guess, about why, certainly from the perspective of infill and density, why the city and why the official plan is focused on that. As I'm sure you all know, the city is projecting that over the next 25 years, the city is projecting that we're going to add roughly 400,000 people to the current population of about 1 million residents. Back in May 2020, the city and council approved a growth management strategy. That was a subject, as I'm sure many of you are aware of quite an extensive debate about that growth management strategy, in that it calls for roughly 60% of those 400,000 residents to be absorbed within the existing built up urban area, and the remainder going to areas that are currently undeveloped or greenfield areas, but are also within the existing urban boundary, and as well as within new lands designated that will result in an expanded urban boundary. But again, so 60% is what we're looking to absorb within the inner urban area. You know, generally speaking, I think it's, although the debate in my view, got a little bit confused during that time, the rationale for adding density to the existing urban area, the key rationale being that it makes more efficient use of public investments in public infrastructure, pipes, transit, that type of thing. That's really a key reason for focusing growth in urban areas first, certainly from a financial perspective of the city. Again, there are other lenses to look through, and Rob has talked about the environmental lens and reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by reducing our dependency on cars, by adding density so that we can be in more walkable neighborhoods. But that housing of 60% of those 400,000 people, which we expect to arrive in the urban area, or that equates obviously to about 240,000 people. That translates roughly to 95,000 new dwelling units, because the city assumes that about 2.5 people live in each dwelling unit. So that means adding 95,000 new homes or dwelling units to the urban area. And I guess increasing density is a key strategy, obviously, for absorbing new residents. And I think if we do it well, can also be the key to neighborhood regeneration, to use that word, and increased walkability. But again, the key is to do it well and to do it appropriately, to building in a way that maintains the desired characteristics of neighborhoods, the things that we love about our neighborhoods, the character, and some of the comments obviously in the chat here reflect that. But also adding density in a way so that we can actually absorb people. So the city is calling for new development in the inner urban area, the inner urban transect to be more precise, to meet a minimum density target of 80 dwelling units per net hectare. So currently, as I said, the average density in the study area is about 15 to 20 dwelling units per net hectare. So that's a considerable difference. Now, I think it's important to understand that that 80, the target, as I understand it, and I believe following the avalanche of comments that the city has received on the official plan, this is likely to be reviewed, their approach. But as it is, the draft official plan, to my understanding, that minimum density target is on a per lot basis. So what it means as development applications come forward, the thought, at least initially, has been to apply that minimum density target within the inner urban area. And so I think rather than saying this is a target for a neighborhood as a whole, or a ward as a whole, or what have you, so that has certainly has certain implications. So I guess the question here is, how could this neighborhood add density to some extent to ensure that, to go after, I guess, the benefits, and we can talk about what those benefits might be specific to your neighborhood, to try and get at the benefits or unlock the benefits that could be achieved through regeneration and by enhancing walkability in that sense. But at the same time, recognizing how important it is to maintain the desired characteristics of the neighborhood. So it shouldn't be a matter of, and I would sort of argue that in the past, the city has been focused on meeting intensification targets above all other objectives. And so it's been a focus on the numbers and the other elements. And we like to think of those other elements as being sort of, we refer to it as sort of an ecosystem of elements that all have to come and work together within a neighborhood. And by that, I'm talking about, again, local commercial services, parks, green space, making sure that tree canopy is intact or replaced where we lose trees, all of those sort of things. So I think but that's the question. That's one of the questions. It's not the only question, certainly with respect to walkability, but it is an important question of how do we add density to our neighborhoods to some extent, but at the same time maintaining the desired characteristics of our neighborhoods. So I think I'll leave it there. Rosalind, do you have anything to add to that?
I think that's great. And I hope people are able to keep one eye on the chat, because there's been lots of really great comments in the chat box. Those comments will be incorporated into our kind of ongoing collection of comments and incorporated into our report at the end. We'll also be checking through them so that we can incorporate some of those ideas in our discussion next Saturday. So the last thing I wanted to do today was to take you through the workbook and worksheets that we'll be using next Saturday. So I'm just going to, and I put in the chat a link to where you can find them online if you haven't yet received them, one way or another. You can find them online instead, whatever works for you. And so it's 2 documents. The one I'm showing you now on the screen is the workbook. Can I get a thumbs up? Have you seen the workbook? Carol? Yes, okay. So there's lots of stuff in the workbook, and I would recommend that you use it as suits you. Don't feel that you have to read through it diligently. Certainly if you could scan through it to see what elements of it might be of interest to you, that would be great. And it'll help you to kind of orient yourself before the next session next Saturday. The next session is 3 hours, and we'll be going through topics in the order of this workbook. So at the front end of the workbook, you'll find some general information about how the workshop will run and kind of the key topics that we'll be looking at. There's some definitions that you might find helpful, and a little explanation about walkable neighborhoods. So Walkable Ottawa, because we have this sense that a transition to being walkable, it is, as Carolyn used the term, like ecosystem. It's all the pieces matter, and there's a lot of different pieces at play. So we think about them in two categories: the pieces of the puzzle that make your neighborhood practically walkable, and the pieces that make it delightfully walkable. And both are important, because we're not going to get out of our car just because we could walk to get milk, but it's a nasty walk. We're going to get out of our car if we would enjoy the walk. So we want to make sure that we keep in mind all of the aspects of walkability. So this list might be helpful to you. A little bit of information about your study area, and then into the modules. So next week, we'll break up our discussion into a series of modules or talking points. And many of the modules will start off with receiving or presenting the feedback that we've received from you guys over the course of this week. So there's some work that we're hoping that many of you will take on this week in order to gather information about your neighborhood, to have that feed into next week's session. And so throughout this document, there are a number of worksheets, but it's actually easier or more accessible if you open up the worksheet file that you have received, or that you can find also on in the website link. This file takes 6 pages out of the workbook and compiles them together, because these are the 6 pages that you need to print out and that you can use to do your prep work during the week, okay? So these 6 pages are sort of your assignment if you want, and you don't have to. You can also pick and choose as well. So the first sheet asks you to take, you've printed it out, you take it with you for a walk. You can also, if you choose, go on a virtual walk. So I mean like a Google Street View kind of a walk, if that's your preference, or if you're unable for whatever reason to walk. So go for a walk and annotate on the paper the features along your walking route that make it particularly a practical walk or an impractical walk, that make it a delightful walk or a dreary or mundane walk. And then also mark any walking routes through this study area that you think are particularly frequented by people for some reason. Okay, so that's the first sheet. Pretty simple. Mark it up, in whatever fashion you like. You can use colors, you can just scribble stuff on. And then we'll ask you to scan or photograph and send it back to us. The second sheet is very similar and really only needs to be done for those of you who like to ride your bike. So if you are a cyclist, then we'd like you to go through the same exercise again, but with respect to biking. And then both of those 2 sheets will feed into our first module of next Saturday. The next series of sheets feeds into our second module for next Saturday, which has to do with infill and density. And because infill and density is, well, the whole density thing with dwelling units per hectare, it's complicated and confusing, even for me, and I work with it all the time. So putting together these worksheets, I actually learned quite a bit about density. So these sheets are to help us all to kind of understand and kind of get on the same page and use the same language when it comes to infill and density. The first sheet asks you to take a look at these 3 pictures and to annotate, scribble on, put little arrows, whatever you'd like, to point out the things that make these places nice or less nice to walk past. But it also has density figures. So it starts to help us key into the kinds of densities that already exist in your neighborhood. This one is actually just on the edge outside of the study area, but it's close enough to use as an example. Yeah, it's a start for thinking about what different densities could mean on a streetscape and how buildings front onto the street. The next page. If you are mathematically inclined, you might like to calculate the density of your own home. And if that interests you, it's a great way to kind of get clear in your head some density issues. And I've laid out the calculation that you can use here. And so you can calculate your own density. The bottom of this page is a little test your understanding, little mind bender kind of question for you to think about density. The next page, this one's really only for math enthusiasts, but if you really want to crack the nut on density numbers, go for this. And then a little challenging guess the density question on one of the apartment buildings not far from your from the subject area. So if you pick away at some of those, I hope that by the end, you'll have a clear understanding about density issues that you can then bring into the conversation next week. And those pages on density, you don't need to send those back to us. That's sort of for your own work and understanding. Whereas the first 2 pages where we're asking you to map things, we would like you to scan them and send them back to us. And then the last sheet in the worksheets, again, is a map. So again, this one we'd like to get back. Oh, you know what? That's not correct. This one also we'd like to get back. Sorry about that. You could just send them all back, but the last sheet is for the 4th module. It has to do with shops to walk to. And what we're asking you to do is to simply identify everything of unique interest throughout the study area. There's a list up here, but feel free to go beyond the list. Shops, benches, parks, mailboxes, transit stops, any kind of features of any significance to your neighborhood. Particular walking paths that cut through places. Any kind of signage, anywhere that somebody might have a book trading post at the end of their driveway. So any of those things, in order to get a map that's populated with all of the anomalies and lovely things that are spread throughout this piece of neighborhood. So I'm going to stop the share and ask for questions. Put up your hand or put a question in the chat box. Yeah, go ahead, Gabby.
I have a question. We live outside of your study area. So do you want us to do it? Or because it's really not my neighborhood. I mean, we are in Alta Vista, but just a little bit further out because it's not my hood, so to speak. So do you want my comment or not?
Yes, we do. We still would like your comments.
Okay.
And you may bring a different perspective than somebody who lives in the hood. So that's okay.
Well, it's pretty similar. There's not much of a difference.
Okay.
Like, yeah, we have a little bit more stores than the other folks because there's absolutely nothing in the study area. But yeah, it's not that different. Okay.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, no, it would be good still. Yeah, Marina.
Yes, thank you. Mike, one of the things that I just got triggered with just now was the statement that Rob made, excuse me, Rob made, and it's that the city has slated this area for relatively quick intensification. So can you explain to us what that would mean and why would waste time talking about stuff if they've already decided they're doing intensification? And I don't mean just to say to us, let's help them get it right. It's what does it mean in terms of developers already involved? That would be one of my questions. Thank you.
Can I quickly address that before turning it over to you, Rosalind? Just a quick answer. And so, yeah, what I was doing, Marina, was just responding to a question. Why this particular part of Alta Vista, why was that chosen? And it's through a look at the new official plan, right? The draft official plan. And we looked at the maps and we said, okay, so it's in the interurban transect. Oh, and it's in a specific overlay, which means that the city is proposing to move forward more quickly. That said, you know, as Rosalind alluded to earlier, things can change. The city is adjusting its official plan. So, you know, I'm not saying it's a done deal, but that was what prompted us to want to go into this particular part of Alta Vista, because we thought, okay, things are changing quickly. The city's proposing to change quickly. Let's have a conversation about, you know, how to get it right, how to respond to that in light of the city's policy direction.
Thank you. And can I just make one further comment? I read last night on something, I think it was an article in the Citizen, and apparently the mayor has said that he's denied any slowdown in the process. I just can't recall it off the top of my head, but there's a statement where he's denying slowing down in any of this movement forward. And that concerns me because we have no idea yet how the pandemic is going to impact our city. And I'd like us to have a look at that part as well. And what's the hurry? Is it the developers that are, yeah, there was another thing on rezoning. So are we going to have any clout at all in terms of holding up the zoning plans? Because that's separate to apparently the city planning. So I'm not I'm not very clear this morning, but those concerns are what I want to make. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Marina. And before I just turn it over to Rosalind, yeah, 2 developments, right? And Marina, you just alluded to one. The FCA, the Federation of Citizens Association, asked for an extension, and the mayor said no, essentially. They asked to put it to make it an election issue, right? And the mayor said no. So that's one development. The second development, which happened just over this week, is that Stephen Willis, the city, said they're actually going to come back with some draft recommendations earlier in the process than anticipated. So that's a win for the community. June, we should see, I think it's June, we'll see the preliminary recommendation. So things might change there. And so there is an opportunity here with workshops like this where we're feeding into the plan to kind of help them get it right. But the ball is definitely rolling. There's momentum on the city side, clearly. And now I'll just pass it over to Rosalind.
Okay, one of the things that is really very jarring about the official plan is that it doesn't propose a viable or clear idea of how the density would be absorbed or included in existing areas. It's got some statements that are vague and some sort of targets that are unclear. And so it doesn't leave us with any ability to really anticipate what the city has planned for all of that new density. There's statements in the plan about almost half of that new density being in apartment buildings and apartment towers. But speaking as someone from the development industry, can say that that's not possible. There aren't half of us that want to live in apartment buildings and apartment towers. So people in the development industry aren't going to build what nobody wants to live in. And so there's a whole lot of reckoning that needs to go on in order for the city to have an actual plan for where that density goes. And since we can see that they don't yet have an actual plan, now is certainly the time for us to be talking about what we think should be the actual plan. And there's no better way to talk about that, I don't think, than really at the neighborhood level. Really looking at a real piece of a real neighborhood and trying to understand what would it really mean on the ground for the people actually living there. What are the options? So next week we'll have some real options for you to look through. If you're itching to find out in advance, then read ahead in the workbook and you'll see what we will be discussing specifically with respect to development options. I'll just point out the part of the workbook that I'm referring to. So in the workbook, you'll see that in the section on infill and density, it starts off with the worksheets that I showed you before, but then it also has the, in purple, the bits that we're going to talk about in breakout rooms next Saturday. And there's actual development scenarios diagrammed out for our discussion and some stats on what those development scenarios would mean within this study area. So we'll have some very specific examples to talk through and some tools that can allow us to envision possible options and to discuss them hopefully quite fulsomely. And I think we are out of time. So Rob, do you want to make any closing statements?
Just want to, thank you all for being here. And again, to Marina's question, like this is something we hear about often, like, is this already a done deal? And I think it's a really good question. It gets to the heart of what we hear every day at Ecology Ottawa for a range of decisions impacting the environment, right? And I think the answer is no, it's not. And meetings like this are just so critical to having that discussion. We'll be in touch with Councillor Cloutier. We'll be in touch with city officials. We're going to try to give them as much as we possibly can to help inform their decisions. So I think it's just really, really amazing that you're taking the time to provide this feedback. And I think it's so important. Just like to thank you for being here. Cheryl, again, is your point of contact, Cheryl Randall at ecologyottawa.ca. You should have received a few emails from her already, but if you have questions on logistics, on, you know, I'm missing the workbook or I don't know what to do, please get in touch with Cheryl. She's waiting for you. And we're going to come back again next week, right? Let me just double check the time. I think, Cheryl, it's something like 9:30 to 12:30 next Saturday morning, right? Okay, seeing some head nods. So this is the first of a two-parter. The second part is where we all do our homework over the week, and then we come back and do a deep dive. And often at these sessions, we come up with hopefully some really creative solutions, some innovative ideas that'll really kind of bring the neighborhood to the next level. So just really wanted to thank you again and look forward to a great chat next Saturday morning.